Okay, in this video we're going to be covering Subway Train Rail Control Map Editor and the basics of using it. And I have a PowerPoint presentation here to go ahead and go through the basics. So, um, the Map Editor window is going to look something like this here. And to get to there, from the launcher window here, you will go into the Map Editor. Pretty simple. And that'll go ahead and open up our map editor. So the first thing you need to know about the map editor is some of the terminology. And one of these terms is the entities. And the entities are shown in these map pieces located right here or on the left side of the map editor screen. Map pieces are the pieces that actually make up the map. So for instance, we have track, switch, handoff, etc. Obviously, a signal is an entity. Just everything that you would put on the map. Every entity has its own ID, and every entity has its own set of properties. And we'll define properties in just a little bit. But the first thing we're going to go through is the ID and rules for creating IDs. So the first rule is no spaces. You should never ever have spaces in where your IDs are. It's just a convention, and the system doesn't like it. Second thing, no special characters. You should not have @ sign, pound sign, percent sign, dollar sign, asterisk, anything. No special symbols at all in your IDs. It's text and numbers only. Every ID needs to be unique when you're working with a map editor. So a track must have its own ID, unique ID from a switch or a handoff. Everything must be unique in itself. A good convention to use, especially for other people who might be reading the IDs off your map, is to use Camelback case, which is exactly what this looks like here. You can start it off with a small letter or a capital letter. You'll notice in some of my examples down here I start them off with a small letter. That's also good convention as well. But it's to make sure that every word, regardless of how insignificant it is, like the word is here, has its own capital letter. So this text is Camelback. Like I was saying before, it's also good convention to also use an abbreviation. So TRK main 1, this entity would be a track named main 1. So you would abbreviate it like so. Or your switch, SW, crossover. For signals, you'd use SIG. Just pretty much shortened abbreviations for everything. So properties, what are they? Well, they are pretty much your settings for everything that an entity requires. So pretty much like you're configuring each entity. It all has its own configuration. They define an entity. They define how an entity will interact and or appear in the game. So an example would be a switch can have different ways that it can appear on the screen. So those would be your different properties of the switch, or how it'll interact with other entities on the map, or how a signal block is defined. That's all a set of its own properties. It's easiest to set properties after all the entities are placed on the map. So it's easiest to make sure everything looks good aesthetically first, and everything makes sense before you go ahead and start making properties. And of course, an exception to this would be a property that affects the appearance of an entity, such as a switch. The property to set the direction and orientation, we'll cover that later in another video, but it's a property that'll affect how everything should work out. So those are okay to set, but you're going to want to wait to set the rest of your properties after you have already laid everything out on the map and it all looks good. And you'll see why in the next video. So what has properties? Just about everything. The map itself has properties, tracks, switches, signals. and likely any entity to be added in future updates will probably have properties. To access these properties and to modify them, you can right-click on any entity in the screen, including the map background. That'll bring up a menu showing the entity properties. You can also name multiple tracks at once by selecting the tracks in order using Control and left click, and we'll cover that as well, and right-clicking any of those tracks. So this is gonna kind of getting more into the properties of tracks, which, like I said, we'll continue talking about in the next video. So to start a map and add entities to it, you can open the map editor and click on File, New, or Control N. So I'll bring up the map editor here, and I gotta try to access it real quick. Here we go. So it's up here, File, New, or you can hit Control N. These are all shortcut keys, which you couldn't even see. So yeah, there's a menu that drops down here. It says New, Open, Save, and Exit. For some reason my screen capture isn't capturing it, but there are options right here. So if you hit the New option, wow, my goodness. We'll get a new map here. It's blank, so you won't actually see anything on the map here. Okay, and to add an entity, simply click and drag the entity onto the map background. So we can add our track here, we can add signals, we can add our handoffs, and we can also add our switches. So these are all entities, and the map itself, of course, is in the background is its own entity. So back to the PowerPoint. To move entities around, you can click and drag the entities to move them. To move multiple entities at one time, hold Control when selecting, and you can also use the arrow keys to fine-tune entity placement. So back to our editor here, if I were to click on a track, you'll see that it becomes selected here, and I can click and drag the track, and I can drag it around. Same thing with our signal. It's always a good idea to click the background in case it thinks that there's anything else selected before you go ahead and move other entities around. So we can place our signal here. We can go ahead and say place a switch right here, and we can put a handoff here. And in fact, to make this demo make a little more sense, I'm going to put another track here, and I'm going to use my arrow keys to try to fine-tune it. So with this one, I need to move it to the left just a little bit. Nope, that's a little too far. I'll bring it down. There we go. And then I'll go ahead and put my signal right here between our handoff and our switch, like so. Then I'll place some more signals here. Yeah, we'll just call it good for now. Then I can move all this up to the top left corner by Control selecting, see how it selects everything here. And then I can click and drag and move this all up here. Then I click in the background to deselect everything. So to delete an entity, you can select it and press the delete key in the keyboard, and you can delete multiple entities at one time by selecting multiple entities and pressing the delete key. So in our example here, we can go ahead and delete just about everything by clicking once, and then if we hit delete, it'll, again, you can't see this prompt, but it'll prompt to make sure you want to delete these map pieces, and you can click yes, and that takes it away. Or I can select multiple entities here and hit delete, and then hit yes, and that'll get rid of the entities I selected. To save a map, you simply go to File menu and click, go to the File menu and click Save, or hit Control S. Again, you won't see this, but it's just up here in the File menu, and you click Save, and then you can save it somewhere. So yeah, that's the basics of the excuse me. That's the basics of using the map editor. So in the next video, we'll go through individual properties of everything. So.